Yo, welcome back to a brand new video here on the second channel. Today, I wanted to do a video talking about all the good single prize decks in our current standard format. Single prizers have been a thing of the past for a while now, but as we've been kind of inching towards the end of the Sword and Shield era, single prizers have actually started to become pretty relevant again, and some of them being actually top-tier archetypes in our format. Single prizers have always struggled to keep up with the big, bulky 330 HP plus VMAX tag team Pokemon, but single prizes have now started to inch back into the meta, and I wanted to look at all the good ones we have in the standard format, providing deck lists for each deck that is good right now as a single prize deck. And I think single prizes are good. The one thing I'll say is single prizes, of course, being good really is because the basic single prize Pokemon are kind of what's good right now. Evolution single prize Pokemon still kind of suck because they struggle a lot to keep up with the format. But single prizers are all basics right now, and you know what? It works pretty well for what we got. As long as single prize decks are good, then we still have a fun format regardless. So let's take a look at the first one I wanted to look at, and that is going to be Regi's. This is my favorite deck to play right now, and I am a huge Regi stan right now. Regi's a lot of fun to play, of course. The idea is you want to get all 6 Regis in play, and you want to build up each Regi, and each Regi do have their own different things going for them. You got some type coverage with Regigigas against Lugia. You got Regirock for, something like Arceus, but you also have stuff like Regidrago, which is great with its ability Dragon Horde, and you have Giant Fangs. We got Regigigas, which is really good against VMAX Pokemon like Mew and Kyurem. And then, of course, we got Regice, which can be very annoying to play against when, you can't move your Pokemon in the active spot. Something like, Gudra or Regidrago can struggle against Regice. And, of course, we got the bad Regieleki, which is really good for sniping stuff off the bench. If your opponent doesn't have Manaphy in play, you can snipe stuff. Very relevant at knocking out stuff like Dunsparce to activate Lugia's weakness. Regi's is great right now. Regi's is kind of countered right now, though, pretty heavily, actually. One of the issues is Temple of Sinnoh and Collapse Stadium are super popular, and Ice Cube's starting to pop back up a little bit, too. But when we got 4 Path to Peak and a Lost Vacuum, we can always win the Stadium War. Now, some Regieless do, of course, play the Yell Horn, which is very nice to have against Ice Cube, as Ice Cube just completely destroys your entire strategy. But I'm not respecting Ice Cube. A lot of the time, Ice Cube is a very bad card, and people just won't play it because they realize Ice Cube sucks unless you're playing against something like Regi. It's not even good against Lost Box. So, like, Ice Cube is a terrible card, so people won't play it. And that's where Regi's kind of shines, is it kind of plays around that. I think Regi's biggest worry is honestly just winning the Stadium War. There's too many good stadiums right now. Also, Lost City is another big one that Regi has to deal with. So having access to all of these stadium outs is really good. I really like the Path to Peak, as Path is just a very good card. And then, of course, having the Lost Vacuum can be very helpful to get rid of stadiums. You can also use it to get rid of stuff like Big Charm and Big Parasol, which are popular right now. Big Parasol obviously can be very bad when you're trying to use Regice. And then, of course, Big Charm is actually seen play in Lugia and even in Palkia right now. So you kind of need to make sure you get rid of that so you can one-shot those Pokemon with your Regieleki with a Choice Belt on. So this is my current Regi list I'm working with right now. I'm just a huge Regi fan, and it's probably the best single price deck in the format, to be honest. It is definitely the best one, but there are still other good ones. So let's take a look at some of the other single price decks. Lost Box is probably the second best single price deck in the format right now, and there's actually quite a few different variations of Lost Box going around. There's also an Amazing Rare Rayquaza one, which did not make the list. The Amazing Rare Rayquaza deck is cool, but that deck also plays a lot more, 2-prize attackers, so it's kind of a mix of both. And also, I think it's fallen off a little bit. It did win a tournament, but I think it's not as good as the other Lost Box decks I wanted to mention in this video. The one that I really want to talk about was actually the Celebrations Kyogre Lost Box deck. This one is actually starting to pick up some steam and getting a good name for itself. Whoever thought Celebrations Kyogre would ever be good, but here we are. Celebrations Kyogre has the attack Aqua Storm, which allows you to discard the top 5 cards of your deck, and then you choose 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you do 50 damage for each energy you discarded in this way to those Pokemon. So if you mill 5 energy cards, you're doing 250 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon, making it a really good late-game finisher. So the idea of this deck is it plays like a simple Lost Box deck, of course. We got the Sableye, got the Crams, got a Snorlax in the deck. There's, of course, Ice Cube, there's Greninja, there's a Raikou. It's not a single-prize Pokemon, I know. And the other, like the Rayquaza build, the other Lost Box decks actually do play a lot more, 2-prize Pokemon, so it's not as, it doesn't count as much, though. Some of them might play Drapion, which I guess you can count, because you kind of just need to play Drapion right now because of how popular Mew is. But Raikou is used in the Celebrations Kyogre deck because it is a really good attacker that does a lot of damage, and it's also good against Lugia, and Palkia. So it kind of counts. It is not a single prizer, I know, but for the most part, this deck has way more single prizers, and a lot of the time, you're not even going to use Raikou. You're not going to use Raikou against Giratina or any other matchup that's not Lugia, and if Lugia just plays Dunsparce and you don't knock it out in time, then Raikou's pointless. But for the most part, it is still like Lost Box. A lot of the times, it's actually just a Sableye Kyogre deck, where you're just trying to put your deck down really low. So the idea of the deck is you're trying to put your deck down to like 0 cards in the deck, and then you want an Energy Recycler, you put 5 energy from your discard pile back into your deck, and then at the end of the game, you drop a Kyogre on them, and you just knock out 2 Pokemon and win the game. game, you can set up damage with Sableye on this Pokemon, so the 250 damage always knocks them out because they're going to already have damage on them. Not to mention, you can just target Manaphy over and over again with Lost Mine, and you try to just keep picking away at the Manaphy using Lost Mine. There are other good single prizers. You still have the Snorlax, which is a really strong attacker. You got the Cram, which hits pretty hard. Of course, you got Ice Cube in the deck with Block Face, allowing you to prevent all damage on this Pokemon by basic Pokemon, which can be very, very good, too. Obviously, really good against Regis, which I know I just talked about, and I just said Ice Cube sucks, but you can get away with playing an Ice Cube in a deck like this, because it is all about just a toolbox of attackers, so you can get away with it. Even Radiant Greninja's in the deck, which is really good, too. You got Moonlight Shuriken. So this is the list here for the Celebration Kyogre. I almost said Amazing Kyogre, which actually starting to see play right now, believe it or not, but I didn't want to include in the list because I think the Celebrations one is a little bit better and a little bit more popular. But yeah, Celebrations Kyogre Lost Box is a really strong deck, and I definitely recommend giving it a try. And it's one of the more interesting Lost Box decks. It's one that does require a little bit more skill because you do have to make sure you're using your resources correctly so that you're able to activate the Kyogre Recycler combo. But it's a really rewarding and very strong deck, and it's a great single price deck right now. The next best Lost Box deck is probably just going to be the old Sableye Cram Zard deck. Now, this is a very good alternative if you don't want to play a Lost Box deck that requires too much extra thinking. You do have this deck, which obviously will still require thinking, but not as much thinking as that Kyogre deck. So basically the idea is you have the attackers. Obviously you got Sableye, you got Cram, and then you got the late game Charizard. And this deck is still very efficient at what it does. There's a few different ways you could build this deck. Some builds are going to be playing more copies of stuff like Drapion within the deck. Some builds will be using a Galarian Zapdos V, but then there's also just like the more straightforward version here using cards like Cross Switcher as your Gust and just trying to play as aggressive as possible with your Sableyes and your Radiant Charizards. Of course, Radiant Charizard does do a lot of damage in the late game. You can knock stuff out. You set up damage with Sableye, finish stuff off with Charizard. You got the Cram pressure. There's a lot of things that this deck does that is just really, really powerful. And it's a little bit more faster than, say, like the Celebrations Kyogre deck, because you're able to spam Comfey more, as the deck does play 4 Rope, 4 Nets, and 3 Switch card alongside the Cross Switcher. So there is so much, like, switch within the deck that you're always going to be able to just spam Comfeys all the time and just easily go through most of your deck. If you're very good with managing your resources, you should very easily be able to set up a lot of win conditions with this deck and keep your deck as thin as it can so that when you need to find cards, if your opponent plays Roxanne or Marnie, you have the outs to kind of counter those plays, which is what makes this deck really, really powerful and really, really good. Again, there are lists that utilize cards like Galarian Zapdos, and of course, there are builds of this deck that utilize the Drapion, but I do think that a straightforward cross-switcher build is also pretty good, and it's the one that I wanted to showcase here in this video. But yeah, this deck, well, it still requires a lot of thinking and skill. It's not as much as the Celebrations Kyogre deck, but it still requires a lot of resource managing, a lot of thinking, a lot of planning out your turns. But I really think this deck has a lot of potential and is probably my go-to pick. If I was going to play a Lost Box deck, I would still probably play Sableye Cramzard because I still think it's like maybe the better of the two, but it's also the one that I think has the most amount of kind of potential for a different kind of straightforward plays as opposed to the Kyogre build, which kind of relies heavily on those kind of late game Mirage Gate, Celebration Kyogre, insane combos, and this build doesn't require as much as that kind of combo-based action. So it's kind of why I like it a little bit more. It's the Lost Box deck I would personally pick if I was going to play any Lost Zone deck. It would still probably be the Sableye Cramzard deck. Well, of course, basic single price decks are good. Of course, evolution decks are struggling, but the only good one is really just the Zoroark box deck, which is nice to see an evolution single price deck be well right now. Of course, Zoroark did gain a lot of new tools with Radiant Jirachi, Raichu, Appleton, Braixen. A lot of ways you can build your Zoroark deck. Some builds are, of course, using Bibarel. Some builds actually don't use Radiant Jirachi. Instead, they use Radiant Charizard. Of course, with Mightyena, it's good against Mew. You got Appleton, which is good against Lugia. Flapple, good against abilities. Of course, you got Cleaver, which is good against stuff like other single price matchups where you can kind of have a good attacker in there. You got Braixen, which is a nice attacker. You got Slowbro for the checkmates. Raichu, which is good against Palkia and Lugia. Then you got, of course, the Hisuian Zoroark, which is good against Duraludon and like Goodra and like Regidrago and stuff. And Zorobox is just really sick. It's really the only good evolving single price deck right now. All the single price decks are really just all basic decks because basics can keep up with the fast-paced tempo of the format, but Zorobox, thankfully, having counters to everything does make it relevant. I will say, though, when building Zoroark, I think you have to go ahead and try to figure out ways to counter Lost City. I think, really, you might have to play multiple Mightyenas, maybe even play, like, 2 or 3 Mightyena to beat Mew. Even adding a Drapion can be relevant, too, because Mew will give you a hard time, because when they Lost City or Mightyena, you're going to have to find different ways to win the game, which can be difficult to do. So I definitely think you might want to maybe try a different way to kind of approach a Mew matchup, maybe even just play 3 Mightyanas, or just play like a couple Drapions too, might be your way to beat Mew VMAX, because Mew will give you a hard time, believe it or not, and because Lost City does suck. But I think Zoroark is really the only good, like, evolving single price deck, and it's definitely good. And there's different ways you can craft your Zoroark deck, which is what I like about it. Some builds use Charizard, some builds use Bibarel, some builds have Wormadams in the deck. There's a different amount of ways you can build your Zoroark deck, which is what I like about Zoroark, is their creativity and the amount of options the deck has to be built, which is what I like and respect about the deck quite a bit. Finally, I want to look at Control, which is technically a single price deck, and it has a lot of options against a lot of the top decks in the meta. Of course, Control is a very hard to play deck, and a lot of thinking does go involved in how you're going to play your deck and, you know, kind of utilize your win conditions. But Control is just definitely really cool right now. There's a lot of different options for how you can win games. You got Ice Cube, wall off all basic decks like Reggie. You got Miltank, which some decks don't even have answers to, and even if they do, sometimes they can't deal with the onslaught of Miltanks you can throw at your opponent, which does make Miltank pretty sick too. Of course, there's the Celebrations Yveltal, which is really good against Lugia and Mew. You can just run them out of energy really easily. You discarded with 3 special energy from your opponent's Pokemon. You can just constantly remove their resources from play, making it very hard for those decks to keep up with the attacks, which is what makes the Celebrations Yveltal so good in this deck, is it just spams the attack over and over. Radiant Jirachi is kind of cool too, with the ability to set up your board. Having Astral Misfortune is kind of cool. You got the Eldegoss loop you can do with double turbo energy, which is really nice. Eldegoss can be great to loop and just kind of keep up. You just go Eldegoss into Miltank over and over again, like looping cards like Bird Keeper, so you never lose, because you'll never deck out as you just keep attacking with the Eldegoss over and over. There's even Mew to set you up a little bit more. You got Pikamiku, which is really good to draw a card, keeping your deck low. You can also use it with Irida to draw a card and get an item get an item card. And then you got Ribombee here with Tricky Steps. You may move an energy from your opponent's active to one of their bench Pokemon. Really good in matchups where you can just constantly move around energy to awkward Pokemon, making it hard for them to kind of keep up and attack you, which is really cool too, of course, when you combine that with cards like Harshnammer. It can be pretty annoying. There's other control cards you could utilize in a deck like this, of course. Something like the Snorlax with Block is also a good option for this type of control deck, but this control deck kind of utilizes more of like a annoying energy removal strategy, using the hit and run Eldegoss loop with Miltank kind of in the late game as another option to win your games, and having the Ice Cube option against something like Reggie's can be very difficult for Reggie's to even deal with. And Control just seems to be in a pretty interesting spot right now. I really think the idea of using Yveltal and Miltank is just a good option right now. And Yveltal seems pretty good right now in the format when you're playing against those big special energy decks like, of course, Lugia and Mew. So definitely tweaking around with Control, using Yveltal in your control deck is something that you can kind of base a control deck around and then kind of build around from there. And that is kind of what we've seen with Control. And Control does count as a single price deck. Yeah, you do play an Eldegoss in the deck, and it is a key part of the deck, but still mostly using basic Pokemon to kind of win your game at the end of the day. So I still kind of count it as a single prize deck, because you're still using a lot of single prizers and basics to kind of win your game. So it still kind of counts as a single prize deck, even with the Eldegoss. It's like that Kyogre deck having the Raikou. It's still a single prize basic deck regardless, even with the Raikou, which is really useful in just like 1 or 2 matchups. But that's really it for the best single prize decks in the format. There are other Lost Zone decks, of course, that are out there, but I think I wanted to highlight the Cram Sableye deck and the Celebrations character deck the most. But there are other builds, of course. The Rayquaza build is kind of cool too. But yeah, single prizes are in an interesting spot right now, and there's definitely other ones that could pop up over time. We'll have to see how it goes, but it's nice to see that there are good single prize options right now in the format. And single prizes have struggled for quite a while now in the format due to the speed of the format and just how aggressive everything is. But it's really cool to kind of see single prizers pop back up. And I wanted to list some of the cool single prize decks you can play right now that are actually good and can win you games, and that can keep up with some top meta decks. But that'll be it. If you all enjoyed today's video on the second channel, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the second channel, hit that subscribe button right now. And I will catch you all later. You can check out some of the stream VOD videos here and all that good stuff. Yeah, that'll be it for me. And hopefully I'll see you soon with another video here on the channel. I'm working up some pretty cool video ideas, so get hyped for that.